Good evening. Welcome to Framed and Bound, a podcast about movies set in the literary world. This is our first episode of 2025. We've had a couple of delays, mostly because I started trying to actually edit these episodes down so you don't hear every time I go, there's this thing, stuff. So trying to make a little bit of a more listener-friendly podcast, unfortunately, also means more time, and it's been a busy time, which is why there hasn't been a new episode in a while. This episode that you're about to hear finds me joined by the writer Jesi Bender, author of The Book of the Last Word, the play Kinderkrankenhaus, and a collection of poetry, Dangerous Women. We are going to be talking about The Shining, director Stanley Kubrick's 1980 adaptation of Stephen King's novel. The screenplay is by Kubrick and Diane Johnson. It stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, Scatman Crothers, and Danny Lloyd. It's about a frustrated writer who takes a job as winter caretaker at a hotel. He brings his family there, and things do not go well for any of them. So yeah, you're probably familiar with this if you're listening to this. You've probably read the book, or seen the movie, or seen the miniseries, or you're familiar with someone going, rad rom, or a dude in a bear suit having sex with a dude not in a bear suit. All these things are part of the mystery that is The Shining, and we're talking about it on Framed and Bound.
I did the bad thing, and I saw this as a kid. So I saw
Oh,
the
wow.
Kubrick movie, and then, I mean, I guess I wasn't that young, but I was just talking to my mom the other day about a series of movies we watched when I was young that I'm like, man, I don't know if I should watch those. Like even like Beetlejuice, the new Beetlejuice, I was like, oh man, I just remember being so in love with that movie, but also just terrified at the same time. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I saw this as a kid, and it's some things stick with you and some things don't. And then just watching it, I've seen it a million times, and I've read the book, but only once, and it was a long time ago, like in
Yeah.
my early 20s. Yeah.
It's funny. I'm pretty sure I read the book first. I read a lot of Stephen King in middle school and high school.
Yep.
And then I kind of pulled back, and then I've started getting back into him, which has actually been a really pleasant thing, because it's like, oh, like some of this, like
It's
this,
great.
it's like this guy, holy shit, this guy can write. Like this isn't just, it's nice to be able to like appreciate some of the craft of that in a different way. But I
Yeah.
think, but I think one of the things that sort of threw me is like, because I had not seen the film first, I was kind of expecting a more faithful adaptation, and so there's like so many terrifying things in the book, like the hedge maze animals coming to life, and like
Yeah.
which is not in this. And like rewatching this actually tonight this week with an eye towards discussing it, it's kind of like maybe a lot happier with what Kubrick and his collaborators did to adapt it. But I also kind of, find myself agreeing a little bit with what I believe is Stephen King's like one big criticism of it, which is the character of Jack in the novel versus in the movie are two very, very different guys.
Yeah.
Which I guess I think also goes a little bit into the podcast theme of it all, of writers on film and publishing on film.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny that it's not funny, but I remember there are those kind of endless shots of Danny Torrance riding his bike through the empty halls of the Overlook, and like the fact that it goes like the sound going from the rattle to like the muffled when he's on the rug, and I'm just like, and I can sort of think of that and look at that as someone who was once a kid, being like, oh my god, it would be minus the terrifying ghost girls,
Twins,
being
right.
like, come play with us. Also, here are our dead bodies. Ah! Like I feel like probably having a giant hotel to explore as a small child would be incredibly
So
fun.
cool. Yeah.
but also, so it's just like, oh yeah, writing is that must be great. But I would also imagine, like, if to be fair, if I was trying to write and I heard that sound, I would just be like, oh my god, stop, ride your bike. It's a hundreds of rooms. Do this somewhere else. Oh my god.
It's
It's
true. I think, don't you think that that's one of the coolest things about it, though? Like, the thing that I like about Kubrick, especially he does it in all of his movies, but there's like a animal sense incorporated into this, like that with the sounds, with the disorientation of like all of the zigzags and stuff like that, and you know, windows where they don't seem like they should be and stuff like that. You don't particularly maybe cognizantly realize it like the first few times you're watching, but you're like, oh, something's off. Anyway, I think that's one of
yeah,
the coolest things about it is that those writing scenes, because you're like, it dizzies you in a way. Like you can feel the wrongness.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it this is a really weird observation, and I think this is probably going to be the first and last time these two movies have ever been compared. But I remember the summer that of all movies, I swear to God, I'm going somewhere I think rational with this. When I was watching the movie Top Gun Maverick, of all movies, uh, there was something in there that I noticed that the director did incredibly well, which was like, I don't know if you have seen Top Gun Maverick.
I have. It hasn't stuck in my mind too much, but
Well,
maybe it'll ring a bell.
so there's one thing that the director of that film did that I thought was really interesting, which is like the whole thing is like the bulk of the movie is like Tom Cruise and the younger pilots sort of, and he's taking them through the simulation of like, this is the mission, this is the mission, this is the mission. So they do it over and over again. And so even though at the climax, when they're actually flying the actual mission in the mysterious country that is, not any real, that is just like the country that we're at war, we're fighting, that is not going to be named because that's neither here nor there. But like, when they're doing this mission, it feels, all of the beats they have to hit, where it's like, okay, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, and because they've been through it so many times, you understand exactly what they need to do, even though you've never actually seen that location before. And I was thinking about that because I think I believe that Joseph Kosinski, who directed Maverick, I believe was trained as an architect, and there was an interview with him, I think at Vulture, where he talked about like the role of architecture and the role of spaces in his movies, and I was just like, oh, this is a really interesting approach. But then when I was rewatching this, I was thinking about that because there were so many scenes of the Torrance family walking through the halls of the Overlook, to the point where by the end of the film, I think A, you really get a sense of where they are, but then B, there are a few scenes where it seems to me like Jack goes around a corner and then ends up in another corridor where like he shouldn't be. And
Right.
the scene towards the end where Wendy is like trying to find Danny, and she's got the knife, and all of a sudden she's running up a stairwell we've never seen before, and it's just like, it's even more. I mean, Shelley Duvall does sort of, this absolute panic that I think if I was in a similar situation where my spouse was just like, had lost his mind and was trying to chop me up with an axe, I would also be losing my shit completely. But like, you're just like, where the fuck is she? And
Yeah.
it's like, and she is absolutely, look at her face, is like, where the hell am I? Like, what? And it's so effective, and like, and for all that, like, there are those long tracking shots of the
Yeah.
hotel and everything else, and for all that, there are times where I'm like, oh my god, I don't need another one. It's like, okay, this is where this is going, and like the space. I mean, and even like the fact that like when Danny is able to escape from his father at the end, it's because he understands he's familiar with the hedge maze, and
Yeah.
can get in and out, and his father's just like, nope, I'm going to go freeze to death now, and my soul will be
Here
possessed by
forever.
the, yeah.
Right. Right.
Oh, so
I think what's cool too about that is that I think you're right, especially as a kid watching it, you're like, boring, get to the thing. But as an adult, it's what an effective way, and as a writer, to add tension, and also to, have those side by side with scenes where they're so, maybe claustrophobic's the wrong word, but they're so, to get like in the freezer in their weird little
Hmm.
apartment that's so encapsulated in its own little space. So you've got like these huge expansive spaces, and then you've got these little things where they're like kind of
Yeah.
caught too. So yeah.
There was something I noticed again this time through where I've started noticing more and more the way that filmmakers use the space where like, and I think this is a fantastic example of this, where like you are seeing a room and then you will sometimes see a character move all around the room,
Yeah.
but Kubrick will do a thing where like the character will kind of move towards the background of the frame and then he'll cut to a close up of that character. And I mean, I think part of this is also that like the four central characters, all the actors all just have such great faces, um,
Yeah.
where you can show. I think it's especially Shelley Duvall and Scatman Crothers, who are both like the most sort of, I think, audience surrogate characters, and the characters who are more like what you know who are capable, and you know they're not like Danny a child, and they are not like Jack sort of losing,
Right.
having their own worst impulses brought to the surface. But it's just like the two of like they're both actors who like can look and can show tension or can show compassion or can show concern, and
Yeah.
like it's it for all that like I have not read a ton of the discourse, but a lot of the discourse over the was Kubrick shitty to Shelley Duvall.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I don't. It doesn't surprise me that like a director who is who will take that long, that would be a difficult process. But I feel like this is also a film that for all of like that it is especially a very high concept film. It is also a film that like relies on the actors to do so much. Like if
Yeah.
you don't have, I think, well, if you don't have three of those four actors, you I think you have a much a film that would still be a cult film, but would not be as emotionally affecting.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
I 100% agree. I was trying to think about like the acting itself is hmm. So I'm like, is this just a product of its time, or, but I think what you're saying too is like Kubrick with his photographer background and stuff, they have an aesthetic, like maybe not the most beautiful person in the world, but they have such interesting faces and interesting
yeah,
looks about him. Even like Jack Nicholson's not really like a beautiful person, but he's got such an interesting, crazy face. And so I
yeah.
feel like sometimes the acting's a little shitty, but it's good. It's like so great. I love it for some reason, even if it's not, the most. There's a little stiltedness sometimes that I'm like,
Yeah.
what is this? How do I account for this? But I love it.
The
I don't know what it is.
the guy who's sort of who plays the hotel manager.
Yeah.
I kept thinking that oh god, and I'm now completely blanking on the name of the actor who is not the guy who played that, but like yeah, the all of those scenes were like, he's very like, he's very like, hey, by the way, the
Right.
last guy who had this job lost his mind and murdered his family horribly. You're cool
Right.
with that, right? But and there are all the scenes of like him going, when it's the last day and like everyone's just like bye, and it's just like yeah,
Yeah.
like it. I'm still trying to figure out if that is meant to feel a little forced or if that's just like no, everybody else here is really nice and well adjusted and just
Right.
like they've just made a terrible hiring decision in bringing this guy who is like going to lose his mind and be
It's true.
tormented by the horrific psychic residue of this.
Have Have you seen The Killing of the Sacred Deer?
No, I haven't. I've been meaning to, and I have not.
There's something if you ever watch it, I feel like there's some kinship there with the way, because they like Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman's, just insanely wonderful as an actress, but it's very like the way that they're talking. I don't know. So I see what you're saying too, because when I was watching it, preparing for this too, rewatching it, it was, goodbye, Mr. Oldman. It just was like, it felt like, it's so goofy. But it's anyway, I don't have
Yeah,
anything eloquent to say about it. Just as so, I was like, what is the appeal of this? I can't
yeah.
put my finger on it.
Like it felt a little bit like it's still a little bit weird. Like the scene where Dick Halloran is coming back to the Overlook, and like there is the 5 minute long scene of him like that is explaining like here is how he is going to rent a snowcat.
Right.
But I also felt like that worked a little bit better in part because it was like, hey, it was a character we were already invested in, and like that
Yeah.
actually felt like it's like, oh, I am watching two normal, well-adjusted, grown adults have a conversation, about just how things are going and in this, and I'm like, I don't know what it is, but just like again, maybe because it was like a character who I, you know, had already had an emotional investment in, and or maybe it was just that those two actors did a better job of it. I don't even know if better is not really the word, but just like again, it's such a weird pacing choice, but I also kind of get it, and it's also so heartbreaking when it's just like, oh, he's shown up, he's gonna save the day, and then it's like, and then just like,
Immediately.
and then
Right.
just like Jack pops out from like there's just that, I mean, and again it's like Kubrick setting all this stuff up, so it's like that long shot of him walking down and then just Jack Torrance emerging from behind a pillar, like where it's just like literally the architecture of the building like coming to life, and just
Popping them.
this is a weird deep, but like the scream that Scatman Crothers makes when he is which is fair. It's like if I was if a crazed man chopped me in the chest with an axe, like I would absolutely make just the most horrifying sound of like both surprise and just intense pain. Oh man. Yeah. Oh god. Man.
I
Uh
also love him. Well, I love him in general, his character. Obvious, just like what you're saying, we're invested in stuff. But that scene where he's laying on the bed and the news is talking about stuff and he's getting the shining, but just how it opens up to that picture of the nude woman. It's like the whole setting, you're like, this is so great. It's like such a character, an encapsulation perfectly. You know a lot about that guy from that
yeah.
scene.
Yeah. This is a weird segue, and I don't know if this is actually if there's a point to this or not. But there's a lot in here that like watching it this time around I had questions about, and I feel like in the probably in the present age of decompressed storytelling and hey, could this be a prestige miniseries and everything else, like the one big question that I wondered was like, and I think from the from Crothers' performance, you can kind of glean this. But like, was his? I mean, he gives the impression of someone who has been working at the Overlook for a very long time. That was kind of my take on it, at least. I mean, because he is so, you know, avuncular and everything. But it's like, did he fail to prevent does he feel guilt over failing to prevent the previous guy from
Mm.
from this happening? Is that why one of the reasons that he is going from Florida to the middle of Colorado in the middle of a snowstorm, or not? And I
Yeah.
and I also feel like probably I have not yet watched the movie Apartment 7A. That's kind of the Rosemary's Baby prequel, but it's like, are we about to get like a the the life of Dick Halloran prequel coming to a streaming service near you, which I, I don't know. I would maybe watch. I don't know,
They
but
made a grown-up Danny one.
yeah, I have not read the novel or seen the movie, but I will say I do like Mike. I've liked the couple of Mike Flanagan projects I've seen, so I'm a little curious. But I still, the one interesting thing I read about from one review of that was that it sort of tries the film adaptation, because it was like the novel was Stephen King just like writing a sequel to The Shining, and that the film kind of had the difficult task of being both a faithful adaptation of that and a film that could work as kind of a sequel to
Right.
this, which like is yeah. So I've not sat down with that, but I do. It's like, well, I do like Mike Flanagan, and I do like Ewan McGregor, and I do like Rebecca Ferguson. So I'm like, I think Zahn McClarnon's in it, and like, yeah, all these like, it's like shit. Maybe one of these nights I'll just be like, well, I got 2 hours to kill. Why not?
It's hard. I'm so judgy with that stuff. Like, I know I just was talking about Beetlejuice, but have you seen the new Beetlejuice?
I haven't yet. No.
I'm so scared to because again, it was like such a seminal. Like it's
Yeah.
such a. I'm like, oh, don't ruin this for me. But yeah,
It seems like the reviews I've seen have been very polarizing, where like
yeah,
I feel like half of them are like, holy shit, they did it, and half of them are like, it is another like sequel that has no real reason to exist. And I'm like,
yeah, yeah,
I, I don't know. And like, even like critics who I generally like, sometimes there are movies where it's like, if I see a bunch of critics who if like it's, a divisive film, but like a bunch of critics who I like are all like, this is great. I'm like, all right, cool. I think I'm
right.
going to dig this. And like with this, it's just like, no, like people who I respect are all over the map on it. And I'm like, oh God, I don't know. I mean, because it's also like I would like for Tim Burton to make another movie I enjoy, which has
Me
not been the
too.
case for a very long time.
I agree. I agree. It breaks my heart. 'Cause Edward Scissorhands is like my favorite movie ever. So it's anyway.
Yeah,
I'm in the same boat.
yeah. Um, so you were talking a little about apartments in the film before, and actually there was something. One of the things that I was noticing, I think, watching this, I'm currently house sitting, and I have access to a slightly larger TV than I usually do. And one of the things that I noticed was when you see the Torrance apartment in Colorado in the beginning, before they're at the Overlook, there are so many books strewn everywhere, but also like a copy of the New York Review of Books on the. I was just like, is that the New York Review of Books? And I'm like, is that the name Elizabeth Hardwick in giant type? And then it's like, okay, like, yeah, this is clearly, and I both appreciated that, but also it's just like, okay, good. I'm very glad that like, yes, this looks like the home of a frustrated writer. So I think, if I remember correctly, Stephen King has sort of said that one of his issues with the film is that in the book, and Jack Torrance is presented as a genuinely good person who is losing his battle to his demons,
Yeah.
to his alcoholism, to his temper, to his everything else, and like is fighting a battle and loses it. And with this film, I mean, I think there are a couple of scenes partway through where Jack Nicholson does portray Jack Torrance as a, you know, someone trying to do well and someone who clearly loves his son, and like, but it's also like you're not really surprised in this when like he snaps and just all of this, awful parts of his psyche, the misogyny, the racism, the loathing of everybody else comes to the forefront. And I do kind of, I mean, for all that, the details of like him as a frustrated writer, and like there are parts of me that wonder, like, is the backstory of the film version of him that like he had wanted to be a writer, and then they had a kid, and so he had to take a teaching job that he didn't like, and this and this, and he resents his wife and his child for that, and like, but there's really, I think, and it's been a while since I read the novels, but I suspect at least the novel went into a little bit more the question of like, is Jack Torrance actually a good writer or not? And I
Mm.
think with this film just really doesn't particularly care whether or
Yeah,
not. I mean,
it's true.
it feels much more like ultimately. I mean, for all that Jack Nicholson is the top billed person, I mean, it feels a lot more like Wendy. Like the novel feels to me more like Jack Torrance's horror story, and then this feels a little bit more like Wendy's horror story, where it's just like they're hoping for a fresh start, they're hoping for this, and then just everything goes wrong.
I was just gonna say, I agree. To me,
I don't know if I don't feel like Kubrick is, you know, is generally thought of as a terribly subtle filmmaker. I mean, if you make A Clockwork Orange and you make a lot of his work with Peter Sellers and everything else, like not subtle films, but like it is the impression that like he is doing the interview for the caretaker job and everything, but like it seems pretty apparent that Wendy is actually doing all of the work as a caretaker
yeah,
she is operating the radio, she is checking on the boilers, like he is sleeping late and like
yeah,
throwing a rubber ball against the wall, and like she is actually getting shit done, and he is just even before his corruption begins. She is far more capable, and I think I don't want to the sort of oft quoted mediocre white guy, but like it's just like yeah, like who is actually getting shit done? It's like Wendy and Dick are the two people who actually like are capable, functional adults, and
yeah. I agree. Don't you feel like it's that? Well, one thing that I thought was really cool is like you were saying with the books in the apartment before they move. The book that Wendy's reading, and it's like clear as day, is Catcher in the Rye, and
yeah,
and so just catch it and like trying to save people before they go off the cliff and stuff. And I just love those types of things, which is why I love Kubrick so much. But I do feel like you're right in that in some ways Jack in the movie is, I don't want to say one dimensional, but he's to me is kind of deeply malevolent the whole time. He's never really treats her super nicely. He's always like,
yeah,
yeah. And then that scene that you were talking about where Danny and him are in the room together and he's talking to him and he just woke up and stuff. And Danny's like, should we be here, Dad? Let's get out of here. And he's like, I want to stay here forever. And you're just, there's something deeply malevolent. You're just like, don't punch
yeah,
me. So I don't know. But
yeah,
yeah, I agree. I think too, like you were saying, the Stephen King book read to me very much obviously about alcoholism. And I like the like what you're saying too, like that's that's the that's the mind or whatever that the hotel represents. It's like you're trapped with your demons, like you're saying. Whereas
yeah.
the Kubrick one is like, what is the hotel? To me, it just is like, is it just being trapped in the creative process? I don't know else how to read it, I guess. I'm sure there are other ways to read it, but it seems like he's always inside looking out.
Well, and that God, that incredibly eerie scene where like he's looking at the model of the hedge maze, but
Yeah.
then he's kind of seeing them in which there's one line that I think that bugged me a lot this time through, which was the scene where he's in the bar and he's just like, I would sell my soul for a drink or for a beer. And it's just like, oh, come on, man. Like that's
Yeah.
a little that kind of pushing it a little bit too much. Like we get it. Like for me, like the scene where he's just like looking down and he's kind of both there and like then you see Wendy and Danny going through the maze and like you half expect to see just like a giant Jack Nicholson like
Right. Yeah.
watching them. Ugh, it's so creepy. And like God, all of the scenes at the bar, all of the scenes with the
Yeah.
previous caretaker, where it sort of goes where there's all of the like very loaded things and all of the racism and everything else. Oh man.
Yeah.
Ooh,
No, I agree. I think the bar in particular too, just like we were talking about the stiltedness, there becomes like and you're like, is he trying, is that like a 20s, in the movies and stuff, those older
mhm.
movies, they talk like Mae Westy type stuff, I'm like, is that because he's like, what you having, Jack? And just type, that type of stuff. So anyway, it becomes like a whole nother performance in
Yeah,
in that bathroom and in the bar when he's interacting with them and stuff like
yeah.
that.
I have not seen the movie Room 237. Have you? And is there anything in if you have, is there anything in that kind of affected the way or sort of goes into the especially the writing side of this?
I'm trying so Room 237 is a really interesting documentary because it doesn't really try to tell a narrative. It's just these different critics and they'll be like they're just I guess there's thematic episodes, but it really just kind of moves from one thought to another, like a bunch of people talking, and it's really interesting. I'm trying to think of, especially from the writing point of view, they do talk about King not being happy with it. But what the one thing that's just popping in my mind that didn't occur to me the first times I read it, or until I saw the documentary, I should say, was the kind of colonialism and like you're saying, the racism and the American history of taking over,
Mm,
especially indigenous people and stuff.
yeah,
And I mean it's again fairly obvious, I guess, but it just went over my head until I saw those people talking about it.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
I mean, it does. There is the one point where Jack literally says the white man's burdened, which again is like
Yeah.
not super subtle, but yeah. Ugh.
And you know how people have like those theories about there was no moon landing and Kubrick filmed the moon landing. So there's Danny Sweater at one point in
Oh
Apollo
yeah,
11 and stuff.
that's right.
And I was like I guess you could see that because of the Cooper connection, but I was like that's also like a colonial like taking over places and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
um anyway, that was one of the things that stuck out to me.
yeah,
It's great. I'd recommend everyone watching it. It's super interesting.
yeah.
Um,
It is
yeah.
on. It is definitely on my list. I have not. I was kind of hoping I could maybe squeeze it in for before this, but I did not. I did not have time. But it's because I think I've seen. I believe the same director as that also made a movie about like people who have like see sort of have the same recurring nightmare
Oh.
and that movie freaked me out so much. Um,
That sounds cool. I haven't heard that one.
oh, it's really good, but it was also just I was like, am I scared? Am I being terrified by a documentary? Is this supposed to happen? A couple of years ago, I did watch them. There's a documentary. It was playing at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival a few years ago, and it was called King on Screen, and it was an interesting. It was interviews with a lot, although not all, but most of the filmmakers who were still alive who had adapted Stephen King, but there was
Oh,
a little bit
cool.
of discussion of like the TV adaptation of The Shining and kind of and doing that, which I'm curious to watch at some point, but like I also I go in with some trepidation. Like I believe Steven Weber plays Jack in that, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Although I think I've seen him be very good in stuff. Like I'm not totally sure. I actually, it's funny you mentioned Colin Farrell before, and I'm actually like I kind of feel like Colin Farrell is like one of a handful of actors who I think could pull off the like very loving, caring father, and then just like watching this corruption set in and like watching him become more and more malicious. Like
Yeah.
I would 100% like I would be very, very reluctant to watch a remake of that. But I think like Colin Farrell as could be really interesting to watch.
Oh man. So you are you saying you never seen the Shining, the made for TV?
I have not. No, I've seen
Um,
there are some clips of it in the documentary, and like there was
yeah.
some interesting behind the scenes stuff, which actually like had me kind of curious. But yeah,
Did you read The Shining?
yeah,
That's I mean, I haven't read all of King by far. There's just so much of it, but The Shining's definitely my favorite of his.
yeah,
And I think the TV movie is good. It suffers from I feel like a lot of what those like 80s and King movies. There's just that cheese like that's part of our childhood, you can't get rid. I feel like that kind of went away a little bit like in the early 2000s they made like The Mist or something. Like it kind of got more less cheesy, but there's a cheese
yeah.
factor to those 80s King movies. and it's
Yeah.
definitely in there. So, but yeah, but I
Well,
like it.
I remember seeing, I think it was the TV adaptation of The Langoliers, which
Yeah,
like pretty good cast. Pretty. The novella is terrific, but like there is the point where it's like Stephen King can write these like formless balls devouring reality, and
right.
it sounds, and it's just like, oh my god, that's terrifying. And then
Yeah,
you see like bad CGI like monsters, and it's just like this is not. There's just that sense of
mothballs.
like
Yeah.
this is not. This is it. It don't be scared. It's just CGI. It can't hurt you.
Oh
Um,
man, what if I watched one the other day? Thinner. Have you seen
oh,
Thinner?
I've read Thinner, but I haven't seen Thinner.
It's the same thing where it's just so, I mean, I love it just because I guess it's campy. I guess it's the camp that I like about it because it gets pretty cheesy in there. So
Yeah,
anyway.
I think yeah. I mean, I remember watching the It miniseries when I was a kid, and I can remember
Yeah.
watching Stephen King's Sometimes They Come Back when I was a youngin. I'm trying to think if I've watched anything that's like more of a more recent. I have not watched the new Salem's Lot yet. I
Oh, me
have
neither. Yeah.
I did not watch The Outsider, but I really liked that book. Actually, that might have been the book that kind of got me back into Stephen King. Where actually no, that would not actually be an accurate thing to say. I think 11/22/63 was the book that got me back into Stephen King. But
Hmm.
but The Outsider, like I picked up when I was doing a residency in Nebraska 5 years ago, and I was at a Walmart, and I was like, oh, I should probably grab a book for the flight home. And then I was just like, oh, this looks pretty cool. And I read it. I was like, holy shit, this is great. Um,
It isn't, I always admire people who can like write and you can ascertain it as a kid, but it still has the messages in there and stuff. I think that like Vonnegut's like that. I I read Vonnegut really young. I want to say, like 12 or something, and it always stuck with me. And it's still these big thoughts, but anyone can grab it. You don't have to be a PhD,
yeah,
highfalutin type of person. So anyway, I feel like King's on that level. The
yeah,
the barrier to King is maybe the length. They're just they're pretty long.
yeah. What's one of the thing? I mean, one of the things that Stephen King that always really hit home for me when I was reading him as a kid that I found really disquieting then, and like when I think back about it, it's like, okay, no, this was actually like the, Salem's Lot is an example of this, and the Tommyknockers, which I believe is kind of a book that he's not quite disavowed, but has kind of said like it was written as kind of the worst part of his addiction.
Mhm.
But like, but it's both of those are about like the town where you live, the town where people you love the people and you love everything, and just watching the whole fabric of it become completely corrupted, and like the people are turning into monsters, and like
Yeah.
you don't know what's going on. And I feel like it's like a really, really, and it's a terrifying thing. It's an insidious thing. It's something that I think kind of, you know, never stops feeling relevant
Right.
um, in different ways. And I think one of the things that King does really well is like, there are sometimes when I will encounter a work of horror where it's like, you're like, does the author actually find this scary? And there are sometimes where I'm like, I find this scary, and it's clear that the writer is writing about something they find scary, but I also get that like not everyone's going to find this scary. Like I think some of the debate over the film Longlegs, which I really
Mhm.
enjoyed, but like I personally like intellectually like the scariness of that worked on a level for me. But I also get why like someone else might not. But I think with King, he's able to write about stuff that like what if my writer, in this case, like what if my writer's block never went away, and
Right.
what if I became this monster? He's at the end, he's you know kind of barely human, and like it's funny, we did Wolf on the podcast a while back, and like it's kind of similar in both cases. You see Jack Nicholson kind of go from sort of nebbishy guy to like sort of creature of the darkness. Although weirdly, this is going to be probably a controversial statement. For all that I don't, I Wolf is not far and away. The Shining is far and away the superior film, but I actually think Nicholson is better in Wolf, which is probably a weird thing to say, and maybe something that no one has ever said before. But I will stand by it. That is the hill I will die on. And writer's block is something that King returns to again and again as a source of anxiety. But I think he's also able to, like, The Shining is book and film are both classics, and like even if Jack Torrance is not as central, is not necessarily the protagonist of this film, like I can still relate to the anxieties of like, oh my God, writer's block, oh my God, I'm not writing anything good, or like everyone I love is annoying, is like coming in and checking on me, and this is annoying the shit out of me. Like I just want time to be left alone.
Right.
But it also works because, presumably not everyone who watched and enjoyed The Shining is a writer, or, has a writer in their life or whatever else.
But it's so we're thinking of it as writers, and obviously he is a writer. But I think at the heart of it is just, I think a lot of people can relate to, what am I doing anything of meaning, or am I just kind of pissing away, farting sleep until noon and all that stuff? Am I wasting this? I think there's that, and I think there's also kind of that latent violence in everyone, and I think that's the scary part. It's like, oh, people do crazy things, and we can all get pushed to a certain level and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I will say, this is very, very bleak, but there's the part where Wendy is looking at the manuscript, where it's just like, oh, he's written something, and then it's like, oh my God, this is just the same stuff. And then like all of the degree of the different formatting, and like where there's like indented paragraphs that are just all work and no play. And sometimes there are the little variations, and it's like, who was the person on the cast who was just like, okay, you have to do this. You have to write 300 pages of this. See you tomorrow. Good luck. But also there's just something where it's like, there's probably some experimental presses that would be like, oh, I will absolutely buy it. It's just the same sentence over and over again for 300 pages. Sold.
Right. Exactly. It's true. It's like that Hitler question, like if he was a successful painter, would he have, would the Holocaust have happened and stuff? It's probably a ridiculous question to ask, but there is some heart in it, and like where we get our meeting, especially as creative people. Well, Paul Auster just passed away, didn't he? And people were posting about their favorite novels of his, and there was one that I hadn't read. Now I can't remember what the title is, but it's about a guy whose wife dies too, and then he is having a hard time, and he starts writing about a silent film actor. Do you know what?
Oh, I think I know the book, but I can't remember. I also can't remember the title.
But it kind of is not the same story, but very similar in like how you what happens when things go away, basically. So
and I feel like it's also just like that is an anxiety for pretty much every, I don't think there's a writer out there who does not feel some sort of anxiety of like, oh God, what if it just stops one day?
For all the complaining, there's a lot of joy in it, in the annoyingness of it.
That's definitely. So I don't know. That's kind of about all is there anything you wanted to kind of say in conclusion about The Shining or writer's block or movies about writers or anything like that?
I don't think so. I think that was fun. Thank you for having me. That was cool.
Any projects of yours you wanna plug while we're here?
I don't have anything immediately happening, but Whiskey Tit will be publishing my next novel next year. So
fantastic.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Excellent.
So we'll be pressmates again.
Awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. That is fine news.
So
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our conversation about The Shining. Yeah, hope it makes you terrified the next time you're feeling writer's block. No, that's not good. That's not good at all. Our next episode is going to continue in the Stephen King adaptation theme, Lee Matthew Goldberg and I will be talking about Misery, which is probably, I think it's fair to say, one of the best Stephen King adaptations to appear on screen. So that should be a fun one. Thanks again for tuning in. Our new logo was designed by Mack V. If you liked the podcast, please leave a rating on your app of choice. If you want to send us an email, framedandboundpodcast@gmail.com is our address. Our theme music is Life in the Woods of Finland by Arvid Franzen and Eric Berg via the Internet Archive. Thanks for listening.